and that will be the underlying theme of this debate today. The first constructive point that you'll see raised relates to the financial world. It's natural for side opposition to debate heavily on the impact on the financial world, that potentially destructing the euro would create more instability. Firstly, I'd say the stability right now is pretty bad. I think it's already in an awful position. But more than that, we want to show why the financial world is already starting to believe in this motion. Why the financial world is starting to agree with this motion, and why the financial world believes that this motion is probably better for investor confidence. That'll be the first theme. The second thing then will relate to Europe itself. See, many people like to separate governments from businesses, but when you look at a government is very much like a business in many ways. A good business needs a good business strategy. If you have a business with many different parts, and all these parts are operating well, they affect everyone, but the underlying value proposition that links these segments together is flawed, you're in a lot of trouble. That's the big theme today. We will show why the strategy of using the euro is fundamentally flawed, and that the strategy behind that economy is flawed. And by doing so, you will then see that we need to make a change, and again, the time is now. The third point after that will relate to stability, and why having the euro right now is simply a band-aid solution. Let's think of what a band-aid does. We put it on as a temporary relief. When it comes off, with some tension, comes off with some water, the scar is still there, it's worse than before, and nothing is healed. That's a huge factor. Right now, the euro is acting as a band-aid solution, and we firmly believe that the long-run stability is in great harm if you let a band-aid solution serve its purpose. I'll take your point.
I was going to ask, side government seems to be talking a lot about stability. Does side government have any concrete economic proof that the time is now?
You have let me finish any of the constructive points, but yes, we absolutely do, and we'll get into it. Particularly, that is a very constructive point. We'll be happy to give you all the proof you want. Now, I'd like to start on the first argumentation I mentioned, which was related to the financial world. Now, I was watching the Business News Network the other day, watching a series of investors having a discussion about various European equities. And the first thing they actually said was, it was a funny comment, why is the euro having a different effect based on the equities we're looking at? You see, often, when the economy was doing well, we look at the euro as a very broad macro theme. And right now, we're looking at the euro to say, how does it affect Spain? How does it affect Italy? How does it affect Germany? And we can no longer use the euro as a concrete source as a macro indicator. And by using it, the whole investor confidence is derived from that. If you cannot use your macro indicators to justify your macroeconomic analysis, how do you invest? Good investors start at the macro level, and they work down to pick the right equities. But if that first level doesn't work, top-down investing is done. Now, the financial world is already realizing this. The financial world is already realizing this. By not having their key macroeconomic indicators in place, the financial world has not been able to make fundamentally good investing decisions. See, I'm sure that side opposition thought we'd just be arguing stability, just be arguing, very macro points. But it comes down to the role of finance to start with, because finance would have the most impact right off the bat. But if the financial world is already starting to doubt the basis of their investment decisions, isn't the time now? Does it mean that investors may have to change? Maybe. Does it mean that structurally investment decisions might have to change? Absolutely. But if the investor confidence itself is already lost, how can you say that the financial markets do not want this? Sure, there would be opposition to it, but at the underlying theme, if investor confidence is gone, the financial markets will not be sound. If you want a global economy that is strong in the future, it starts with the macroeconomic indicators being fundamentally sound. And side opposition cannot dispute that this particular macroeconomic indicator is not working. When an investor looks at it and is no longer able to use that as a sound basis for a business decision, there's a lot of problems going on there. And that has to change. I'll take it.
So in terms of macroeconomics, are you saying that by abolishing the euro, that's not going to affect every single other country in the world that uses the financial markets?
I'm sorry. I find this to be an extreme. Oh, I didn't see you. Thank you very much.
All right, I think time for speech, and I invite a member of the opposition.
here, the opposition, are here to put forth and fight the motion that the euro should be abolished because we believe it's an absurd one, at best. Now, before we go ahead, we're going to lay out a small agenda of how things are going to work. We're going to talk about how the European Union is working towards fiscal amalgamation. We're going to talk about issues that might arise with the abolishment of the euro, such as hyperinflation. We're going to talk about the impact of the abolishment of the euro on world trade. And last but not least, my leader of opposition will start refuting their point and perhaps not have much work to do since they're weak anyway. Now, to begin, fiscal amalgamation. The European Union has in the past 2 years worked hard towards stabilizing the European Monetary Union. After the disaster of 2008, they have been working towards the Basel Accord 2 and 3, which have worked on tighter reserve requirements, have worked towards perhaps looking at how the volume and the types of securities traded and held by banks. And moreover, the European Parliament in Belgium is working towards creating a more centralized fiscal policy, which means issues such as taxation and all those other matters which caused the financial ruin in the first place will now be plugged. If this government believes that by going ahead with this they're being productive, I wish for them to reconsider, because what they're doing right now, abolishing the euro, is abolishing the currency that stands as the pinnacle of cross-border cooperation. Not right now. Hyperinflation. The government does not realize the simple basic economics. Once abolished, the countries which were once in the European Union will now have to work towards devaluing their currency to a point that is almost 70 times lower than the European Union. What does that mean? These countries now have to resort towards increasing money supply and to afford basic imports. You know what this government is going to push us to? The days of Zimbabwe, when the microcurrencies of the European Union will be worth less than toilet paper.
Sorry, you said the euro is the fundamental foundation of the economy that provides stability. It's providing stability right now? Is that what you're suggesting?
Of course. One word the opponent fails to forget is right now it is providing stability, because if it did not exist, right now the entire European Union would be very fragmented with political and economic issues arising, which would precipitate very dangerous environments on foreign policy. Now, that's why the EU exists. The EU was created because the European continent has been a continent that has been riddled with 2 world wars. And they decided if we became economically interdependent, we probably wouldn't fight as much and perhaps look at going together. That's why there existed monetary unions such as the Benelux. That's why there existed the fixed exchange rate system. Therefore, we believe that if we abolish the euro, we not only give up financial stability, but we also give up foreign policy stability. Then what we are left with is countries that are small, deprived, depressed. And do you know what happened last time there was the Great Depression in Germany? Ladies and gentlemen, Hitler came to power. Is that what this government wants? Not right now. Does this government want a continent where there's small, depressed economies who are looking then to make themselves turn around and might even consider waging war against each other? Do they want to precipitate a World War III? I believe this is stupid and should not occur. Take a seat. Now, to rebut their points, they said the timing is wrong. I believe they said the timing is correct. I believe the timing is completely wrong. Right now, Germany is on a recovery. Right now, you're looking at countries such as Italy, Spain, and Portugal, who are struggling, are working towards a more sustainable solution. To scrap them in the middle of a solution is to deny them a chance to recuperate. On top of that, they said investor confidence is not positive right now. Well, I believe over time it will recover, but to completely abolish the currency, that is not going to improve investor confidence. If anything, it's going to push it into a decline for a much longer time. They said it's a key macroeconomic. They said it's not no non-key macroeconomic indicator. I believe that the people look at the euro day in and day out and hedge their currencies against it. On top of that, and they hedge their currencies for it. Now, on top of that, they did not realize that 26 countries rely on this one single currency. And when they take that currency away, you leave 26 countries to adopt a different currency with each of them, and then look at rebuilding trade agreements and all these other nations. And for this reason, we are proud to oppose this motion.
the vast diverse of countries of which the wonderful Europe has, and the mitigation of risk that our motion would allow for. But first, Hitler? Really? Drop the currency and we're going to get Hitler? I would like to remind you that the 26 countries that you mentioned are currently depending on Germany right now. So, quite honestly, the comment is a little bit distasteful. Remind the judges that the POI that was brought off in my Prime Minister's speech was invalid, considering it was protected. And I'd like to go into engage in some refutation of some of your arguments. First off, that the euro is the pinnacle of foundation. That foundation is currently underwater. And what happens with a cement foundation when it's underwater is it begins to get cracks in it and eventually it falls apart. And that's the whole reason why the government is putting forward the motion to abolish. Fragmentation, I'm glad that you brought this up. Yeah, every single country in Europe is different. Therefore, every single country should have a different currency. That actually goes quite to our argument. Right into what I would really like to talk about. Fundamentally, Europe is got many, many vast different characteristics. Every single country has different pieces of its own culture, its own persona, and most importantly, its own governmental structure, of which would make sense for it to have its own currency rather than share it with countries that are completely different. Not right now. Basically, every country, let's take a look at Germany, for example, since it was so eloquently brought up by opposition. It is a country that manufactures, it's a country that engages in research and development. It is a country that basically creates a dollar, of which is now spent by Spain $2, and France another $3, let's say. And that sort of thing just goes to underline the point that every single country in Europe is different. And therefore, every single country in Europe should have a different currency. Do you not agree?
No, my question to government is, do you not think that these countries who are so vast and diverse benefit from forming a united front and offering the world something different and diverse?
If offering something different and diverse in the form of economic instability is the way that you want to go, basically the economic structure of every single nation is also different. As I mentioned earlier, Germany likes to not spend money as much on social services as, for example, France. Not now. And basically, there's no possible way that you can have the same base in every single country if the economic structure, the actual foundation, so to speak, is different. It just doesn't make sense. And that is why we're fundamentally looking at abolishing the currency. One thing, the opposition brought up that, we went through all the amalgamation process, and it's a wonderful thing, but the fact of the matter is, it doesn't work. And that's why we're taking action, because, quite frankly, the time is now. And if we do nothing, then nothing potentially good will happen, and it could just all fall to pieces, which is quite honestly what will happen.
So, are you just saying that there's no possible bad ramifications, say, with China, who's now going to have to deal with 26 individual countries to trade instead of one unified body?
I don't know if you looked at perhaps some of your clothing, perhaps your calculator, a few other things. They're all made in China. They do many, many things. It's probably a good thing for them. But of course, China's outside the scope of this debate. What I would like to talk about is the extreme risk of not doing anything. And that's fundamentally the reason why the government is proposing to abolish the currency, because quite honestly, we can't stand by and watch the Eurozone completely destroy itself. And that's the point. It is chaotic in Europe right now. And everybody knows it. I'm not sure if the opposition watches the news at all, because they sort of brought up the question of, can you sort of quantify how unstable it is? I mean, for the past year, everybody's been talking about it. The fact of the matter is that debt is sitting, the debt from the countries that aren't doing so well is sitting on top of the countries that are doing well. Now, while this, at this point in time, has been working to an extent, as Germany and some of the other strong countries are basically dishing out money to keep Greece and Spain and France and Portugal and a few other countries alive, at some point they're going to run out of money. And what happens when countries run out of money is that they fail. And when they fail, there's nothing left. And the fact of the matter is the Eurozone, as a complete unit, is actually has a significantly larger gross domestic product than the United States of America. So this is an integral part of our world economy. So basically, if Europe fails, there's no question, it's unanimous across all economists, the world will go into a depression. Would you like that?
My question is, you say that it's going, some countries are strong, some countries are weak, so basically you're presenting an argument that this is only going to benefit some of the European Union, and therefore it's not in the best interest of everyone.
Exactly, it is in the best interest of everyone, because everybody's different. So they should therefore have a currency that works for them and makes sense for the value of their goods and everything else that they happen to do. The fact of the matter is that Europe has to be concerned with mitigating risk. Just like any other person that is logical in the terms of their investments, Europe is a portfolio of many beautiful countries. The fact of the matter is we need to diversify the debt. We need to mitigate the risk across the country. So the easiest way of doing that is to give them all their own individual currency. Why? Well, take a look at one of the stronger countries in Europe right now, the United Kingdom. A great place. The pound sterling continues to be the most valuable currency on the planet. They went through their own crises, and they were able to mitigate that. And that is just proof that the government's motion is the right way to go. Thank you.
And then move into a few constructive points that talk about the economic impacts, not only on the European community, but on the world. My first point of refutation, I'm a little bit appalled by side government's idea that by abolishing a currency, by abolishing a fundamental construct of our global economy today, that we're going to have stability. We're going to mitigate risk by breaking something down. That's a core tenet of what we have. It's strange to me. The second thing I'd like to bring up is that side government talks about the time is now. The time is now. The time is now. It's great. It sounds like it's out of a movie. It's a great buzzword. But side government has failed to provide us with any fundamental economic proof of why the time is now. They just keep saying the time is now, the time is now, the time is now. But why is the time now? Because you turned on Business News Network and some unnamed economist said the time was now. Yes, not now, thank you. I'll take you after my refutation. And my third point is that side government mentions that China is outside the scope of this debate. What side government has to realize is that no man is an island in this world, and countries depend on one another. So yes, China is in the scope of this debate, as are every other country.
So we should keep China's best interests at heart when we're deciding something about the euro?
No, that's fundamentally not what we're saying. We should keep the world's best interests at heart, free trade's best interests at heart, and the global economy's best interests at heart. I'm now going to move into my constructive point. Mr. Speaker, we're returning from the brink of economic collapse. This is a fact. This is something the government can't dispute. And we're at a fulcrum point in the history of the global economy, a time when, above all, the European, nay, the worldwide community requires stability. Stability, not breaking things down, stability to prosper and recover from this dark period. An overthrow of one of the core tenets, as I've mentioned, of the European community flies in the face of global recovery and stability. Okay, we're going to look at this from two perspectives. We're going to look at it from a concentrated European perspective, and we're going to look at it from an international perspective. But I'm going to begin with the concentrated European perspective. So the European Monetary Union, as we know it, is what's called a trade-creating customs union, where the competitive advantage of each nation put together, form a coherent trade community where members build upon the strengths of others to provide the most efficient and most effective markets. A dissolution of the euro forces its constituents to organize themselves into smaller and potentially trade divergent, note the dichotomy, customs unions, creating economic deadweight losses and hurting the nations and their progress towards free trade. Again, free trade, one of the fundamental goals. We're swapping creation for destruction. But let's even forget about Europe for a second, take this on a macro international level. The EU, with the euro, maintains fundamental trade relations. As we've said, no man is an island, and the European Union is especially not an island, with some of the world's economic powerhouses, growing economic powerhouses. China, India, for example, Japan, and others. A dissolution of the euro forces the renegotiation of international bilateral agreements, throwing world trade into turmoil. Not right now, thank you. I'll take you after my second point. Secondly, we must think of the vulnerable nations that are pegged to the euro. The Central African franc, for instance, the legal tender of nearly a dozen nations, is pegged to the euro. Abolition of the currency of these nations puts them at risk for failure, depriving them of the ability to prosper into the 21st century and build on the gains made, leaving them to face this new harsh economic climate that our government would propose on their own. I'll take your point now. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take your point. Yes.
Yeah, so I think you were suggesting that implementation details are the rationale for not fixing a fundamentally flawed strategy, and I'd like to address why you could possibly think that.
If I understood your question correctly, it was why would I think that fixing something that the government terms as flawed is not the right strategy. What we're trying to suggest is that government harps on stability, 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 stability. But then what they want to do is destroy a fundamental tenet of our economic landscape right now. For the sake of more than a millennium of European economic triumph, and for the sake of our society's economic progress, so that we don't have to push around wheelbarrows of currency to purchase apples, we're proud to oppose.
Letting countries choose what they want to do with their own money using their own currency, not at this time.
out. It's a consistent habit across all these nations, which they currently do not have, and I can't see how you're going to argue that Spain and Germany have the same spending habits and how Spain and Germany have the same interests. Not this part. Investor confidence, you know what, investor confidence is going to potentially go up. So, you know what, let's talk about where investor confidence is right now and why the time is now. Investor confidence is not going up. As you heard my honorable colleague point out, investor confidence, people are no longer looking at this, you know, oh, is this a euro-backed currency? They're saying, where is this coming from? Where is this equity? Is it in Spain? Is it in Germany? If they're doing that differentiation there, what are we to say? You know what, the euro is forced to bind you together when people don't see you as the same financial prospect anyways. You're no longer the same financial entity because investors don't treat you the same way. So I don't know where you're saying that investor confidence is going to go up. I'm just putting it at its bottom point yet, and you're saying that, you know what, the bottom's coming up, but I don't see it going up anytime soon, and that is why the time is now. How much longer do you want to wait in line at that restaurant? How much longer do you want to wait around hoping for something good to happen? I'd say it's time to turn back around and abolish the euro. So, another good argumentation I heard over here is that pretty much when I was listening to it, it kind of reminded me of something. It reminded me of the global financial crisis when people were just saying, hey, it's too big to fail. So that's what I've been hearing pretty much this whole entire time. You're saying the euro is just like the eurozone, you know, it's just too big. We can't get rid of it. We need to repair it, all the tiny little cracks. Well, let me tell you that companies, there were mergers and acquisitions and companies broke apart. And do you want to know why that is? Because now it's too big to fail when it's ruining the whole entire economy. So, another thing that you mentioned, and I'll take your point in a second, you mentioned benchmarking. So you said the euro is a benchmark. You know what else is a benchmark? LIBOR. You know what else is in the news right now is a scandal that's being rigged? LIBOR. So all benchmarks can be changed, all benchmarks can be hedged, all benchmarks can be moved around. You have to keep in mind that the economy is evolving. It's not just the current present that you know what, we used to use gold as a benchmark. We had gold-backed money. We used to barter cattle. Should we go back to those times? Move on. I'll take your point.
So you keep talking about moving forward and innovating and making things better. Why on earth would we ever abolish a currency and go back in time?
It's moving forward to a place where each economic entity can move forward with their own economy instead of having to represent the interest of all the Germany wants to move forward with their interests, and other countries do as well. And I'm sure that even Greece is tired of the austerity measures since everyone's protesting right now in case you happen to read the news. I'm sure people in Greece are tired of it as well. They want to do their own spending habits. And that's what happens when you put countries together that have nothing in common other than their proximity to each other at this point. So thank you for bringing that up. And this is why I'd like to get into some of my constructive arguments, not this time. So we have to talk about the fact that the euro is unsustainable. As I already mentioned, as the opposition has mentioned, the reason for putting these entities together is their proximity to each other, and they didn't want to start wars. I'd like to remind you that it is no longer the time and place where there is so much instability amongst Europe in terms of political unrest. It is not a time when we have to worry, does Germany want to start a war in Greece? Because there's no Hitler, first of all. I don't know if my opposition is stuck in the past. But this is not a time to worry about war. This is a time to worry about economics and what is right for the global economy, as you guys pointed out. And what is right for the global economy is a sustainable model. If we know that this isn't working right now, and it hasn't been working for the past year, and it's not working for anyone. Germany doesn't like it, Greece doesn't like it. People are rioting all over the streets, there's record unemployment numbers. If nobody's liking the system, how is that sustainable? How can you guys argue investor confidence will go up when the people in these countries themselves don't see a way out of it? There's increased turmoil, there's increased economic consequences to all these actions, and the status quo simply does not address those. It's just saying, let's keep going in this unsustainable model, and you know what happens out of that is a global recession, as my honorable colleagues have pointed out. So I'd like to thank you for your time today, and the government is proud to do this.
Alright, I thank the parliamentary secretary, and I call upon the leader of the opposition to finish the round for the opposition.
Alright, so I'd like to start off by saying that I'm going to address a lot of the points brought up by government, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of why economically it's wrong. Because we've heard we watch the news, this is going to happen, it's broke, it's sinking, fix it. But economics is fundamental. You can't change the science behind why something works. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that. I encourage points of information because, quite frankly, I will take every single one. So the Prime Minister started off by saying that it's about the macroeconomy. We need macroeconomic indicators that are strong. Tell me how breaking up a currency of an entire continent is macroeconomically beneficial. How is that going to benefit the continent and the world by rippling instability through all of the members? The second argument we brought up was the stability argument, that it's not stable right now and the currency is acting as a band-aid. I don't know what kind of band-aid stays on from 1999 till today and makes an economy stronger than the United States, Japan, and Iran, but that's a pretty good band-aid.
Yes, the band-aid was good in the past, and you said it's not working, which is obviously proven. Since it's no longer working, why are you saying that we shouldn't change that?
So I'm saying why we shouldn't change it because a currency stronger than the United States and Japan, yes, it may be weak right now, but it's still stronger than some pretty damn big currencies. So I think we should keep it. The other argument you brought up was the effects argument. You talk about the effects to Spain and Italy and Germany's so strong and Greece is so weak, and how is this affecting them? How is abolishing a currency, which not only is fundamental to 27 countries, the Union itself is a large trade partner with China, the emerging markets, North America. It's the 8 currencies in Africa are pegged to the Union. How is breaking that apart going to cause positive ripples? I'd like you to prove that to me when you come back up here. I challenge you to prove how breaking up something so strong can have only positive effects and only good things for everyone. The second one is the doubt argument. Yes?
First off, I'd like to address them so happy you want to take every point because you want to waste time in your speech. But I just heard you say that it's so strong, and we just proved the fact that in the news every day they're talking about every country is dissatisfied. So I'd love to hear you explain.
Yeah, so it's not as strong as it could be. But just because it's weak doesn't mean it's not stronger than other currencies. I'm sure if you watch the news, you know how unstable the United States is. I don't think anyone is suggesting that we should abolish that currency. I'll take your point in a second. The cabinet minister pointed out a few things that I think everyone's talking on. He said, Hitler's not important, Germany's so strong, and after all, everyone is depending on Germany. Exactly. Diversity is what people invest in. People have diversified portfolios for a reason. You don't put all your money in one thing and say, great, this is doing so well right now, because in a few years it's not going to be. Look at Canada. Every province specializes in something else, and that adds to its strength, because people aren't always going to do well. As the economy changes, you need to be diversified so you can handle change effectively. So I think it's important to talk about the mitigating risk factor, and that's that, we're doing this and we're mitigating risk, but this isn't something that has to be done. This is something the government is proposing, and let's think about the risks of implementing it. The risks of financial ruin for possibly 27 countries, the risks of global financial instability, the risks of trade agreements being disrupted, the risks of entire nations refusing to do business because it's too much of a hassle with smaller countries. Yes, Germany's always going to have trade partners, but what are smaller countries? Germany is one country of 26, and this affects 26, so we need to be talking about it from all 26 perspectives. Yeah, I'd like to just touch on what the cabinet minister said about China being outside the scope of this debate. I think the fact that the government is insinuating that such a dramatic measure, such as abolishing a currency, and one of the largest economies in the world with 1/5 of the world's population, is outside the scope, because they dictate terms to the rest of the world. Do we really want to go about pissing them off? I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. Okay, so lastly I'd like to get to the parliamentary secretary. She brought up her first point was about the world news. She turns on the world news and, yeah, things aren't going well. When have we ever seen something ever going amazing for someone all the time? Nothing is ever perfect all the time. That's impossible. Yes,
I completely agree with you. That's why we fixed it. Don't you agree?
I agree. We don't move back in time. We go forward and we innovate. We don't say, okay, this hockey team's not working. Let's just cut the hockey team. Each player, they're going to be great on their own. We don't do that. We fix it and we make it work in the new environment. That's what they've been doing. It's stronger today than it was after the financial crisis because they're fixing it. You don't allow them to countries. You can't fix it overnight. It's not going to happen in a year. It takes time for change to be implemented. start a new currency, they're going to have to devalue it for it to properly flow into the markets. Then they're going to have to compete with lower valued currency. And then how long is that going to take for them to rise up as strong economies? I'd like you to talk about that. The proximity issue was interesting. Proximity isn't the only thing that makes you strong. That's true. But proximity sure helps. I think I would like you to argue that proximity doesn't benefit a trade group, that proximity doesn't help you. I don't think that's a valid argument, saying proximity, oh, we shouldn't think about that because it doesn't matter. That's completely just, okay. So the escalation of commitment. And that is that, we're here, we've been here so long, the longer we stay here, the longer we want to stay here, but people made this commitment for a reason. You don't get 27 countries one day drinking beer saying, yeah, let's form a currency. That's not what happened. They formed it for a reason. And those reasonings, yes, things happen. There was a financial crisis. You can't, that can't be changed because it's in the past, but moving forward, you can't say, yeah, let's make everyone less prepared for the next one. Let's weaken everything they're doing, and you know what? Some of them will be okay, so that's fine. I think it's important to look at the role of the opposition. When you go to court, the role of the defense attorney is, majority to make the state prove its case. Everyone has the right to innocence until proven guilty. And I think that's largely the role of the opposition in this debate because the state doesn't have to implement this. And I think if they're going to implement it, they should be able to come up here and refute every single qualm that we have and say economically, not I watch the news, not, oh, it's sinking, yeah, not analogies, economic facts as to why it's wrong. And they should also be able to refute each one of our main points, which are financial amalgamation. You're losing your strength in numbers. Each country is going to have a new currency. How do you deal with the effects of that globally? Hyperinflation, world trade. Who does the EU trade with? China, India, Japan, North America. How are they going to take having to renew all the trade agreements? What kind of pressure does that put on the world? And finally, the interdependence of our financial markets. How are you going to ruin a continental economy and then see that is not going to have ripple effects? How are you going to say, oh yeah, we want to improve macroeconomic indicators, but we're going to ruin a continent's economy? That just isn't logical, and I think that you need to address some of the points that we've raised. I think, this motion shouldn't stand because we don't want to be the government that tips the first domino to global financial trade and overall ruin and instability throughout global markets. Because, it would be great for us if you did it because your government would never get reelected, but you're also putting into
were flawed. Did they clash with it once? No, because we are right. The only clash they had to it was the following. A, they suggested abolishment would create the rise of fascism. They didn't take any of the POIs we stated there, and they didn't address that key point. By not clashing with it, they have conceded the very most important point of this debate. Thank you for that. Secondly, the real point they wanted to speak on was stability and economic theory. And they pointed out a lot of instability that is occurring. I agree. The one difference between what they said and what we said is that we said we know that if you do not abolish the currency now, all the things they mentioned, more austerity measures, more problems, more riots, they're going to happen. The difference is holding up a euro, which is a weak foundation, keeps it alive for 3, 4, 5 years. It doesn't keep it up for 10. It doesn't keep it up for the long run. So all the stability arguments were invalid because what we suggested is that in the long run, none of them are going to hold. If you don't make a fundamentally big shift now, in the long run, all the things you mentioned, and all the things we mentioned would happen anyway. The abolishment is making a change now to make sure that that does not happen in the future. And you really failed to address that point very critically. Focusing on stability without understanding that the same problems are going to happen anyway if you don't make a big change, that's key. The other thing I already mentioned is that making a big change is going to cause a lot of turmoil for different parties. Yeah, sometimes when the real process isn't working, there's going to be short-term volatility, short-term problems. That is not a justification. It is never a justification to not fix the root problem because there's going to be some short-term problems. And that was the underlying to benchmark away from the euro because it's no longer a good one to be used And I'm sorry, you brought up US as a being, and also the justification that keeping the euro alive just because it's doing better than the US is a very weak argument. Doing better than another currency, yeah, it's doing better than a lot of bad currencies. That doesn't mean that the economic theory of those countries are not flawed. That was not, I'm sorry, but there's not 25 countries sharing the US dollar. There's more than 50 countries sharing the euro. That was the entire point of this discussion. So that was a very irrelevant comment to bring up in the role. And I'd like to stress one thing. She said the role of the opposition was just to rebut what we say. No. The role of the opposition is to support the status quo and show why the status quo is working. Have they showed the status quo is working? Have they showed that the stability would be solved if we don't do something now? No, they have not. They asked us a question. What would happen if we do this? I asked you a question. What will happen if we don't? All the insinuating things that you said, they're going to happen in the long run if we don't do it. Thank you very much for your time. And